My name is Jake. I'm Jake Grimley. I'm the CEO of Made Media. And Made Media is a full-service digital creative agency. And we help creative clients to connect with their audiences and do better business using online channels. So what we mean by creative clients is clients like these. Predominantly we work with performing arts venues and performing arts companies. And by full service, we mean that we look at all elements of digital marketing, from discovery and strategy through to getting things live and deployed on cloud hosting and everything that entails. But at our heart, we still think of ourselves as a design agency. So the mediums that we work with are predominantly code and servers and databases and things like that, but really we consider ourselves to be a design agency. And this talk is about designing for relationships. So that's the R in CRM. And what I'm going to focus on a fairly thin slice of functionality, because there's not time to talk about everything involved in designing for relationships online. But I'm going to talk a bit about how we can meet your marketing and CRM needs, whilst also giving your customers the user experience they expect from the website. And the main theme of this topic is that those two things are often pulling in different directions. What you're looking for is people with your hands on the database is not necessarily what people who are using your website and your applications are looking for. So online relationships often start online these days. In fact, it's possible that they predominantly start online. So, you know, if I were a marketing wonk, I would talk about digital touchpoints often being the first touchpoint in a new commercial relationship. So increasingly these days, the first time someone really experiences your brand is when they use a mobile phone to try and research you or maybe buy a ticket or something like that. So really that's how you get a relationship off the ground in this day and age. This is how you currently start a relationship online with E&O. Now, this is pretty unfair, right? We've all been here. I'm sure you could find some websites in our portfolio and you'd find something like this somewhere. But this is what happens with E&O. You decide you want to buy a ticket, you're not known to E&O, so the next click is a form that looks like this. How are you feeling about this? Now, and I'm asking that not from the point of view of the people who are maybe looking at this data behind the scenes, but as a user starting your relationship with an arts organisation that maybe you haven't attended. How do you feel about that as an introduction? Tedious. Okay. I'm going to use another word in a bit, but it's not attractive. Obtrusive. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. There's a huge amount of detail being requested here, and at this point, I think I've got the tickets in my basket, but I haven't even checked out. There's a temptation with this presentation to make all sorts of inappropriate jokes about relationships and what you should do on a first date and stuff like that. But this is a bit like receiving a marriage proposal on the first date. It's far too full on. Okay, but this is, not all registration forms are quite this bad. But even so, just being asked to register probably makes you feel a little bit depressed every time you go to a new website and it asks you to register, right? Yeah. Okay. How about this screen? This is the login screen. Let's say maybe you book a ticket or interact with the E&O website once every 6 months, once a year, something like that. And it's time to log in. How do you feel about this screen? You've forgotten your password. Yeah. Do you have a password? Do you know? Did you register last time? Can't remember. Don't know. So you feel a bit depressed again, right? You feel a bit like, I'd rather not fill this form in. Given the choice, I'd rather not. So who's heard of the $300 million button? Okay, good. If you have heard of it, I'm glad not too many people have heard of it, because I'm going to take you through it reasonably extensively now. This post is from 2009, but it's still not old. And I send it to all my clients when they're asking me, can't we add one more field onto the registration form and stuff like that. But amazingly, in the last year, people have started asking me about guest checkout and anonymous checkout. So I think this message is coming through. But I'm going to talk you through it, because however old it is, it's still, even I reread it yesterday, and it's still really enlightening. Okay, so what happened was a usability consultant, Jared Spall, who's a very well-known usability consultant, was invited into an e-commerce company to see what improvements he could make to their website that would result in more revenue from the website. And they looked at the whole registration login thing. And obviously, the reason that the registration form was there is the reason, presumably, every software developer who ever thought you needed to register users came up with it. First-time purchasers wouldn't mind the effort of registering, because after all, they will come back for more, and they'll appreciate the expediency in subsequent purchases, right? Okay, we're asking you to register now, but it's going to make it so convenient for you next time. So Jared Spall used a usability lab to observe people actually using it and what they were saying and what they were thinking as they went through that registration process. And oh yeah, they figured this was a win-win situation. Wrong. One of the users observed, I'm not here to enter into a relationship, I just want to buy something. Okay? So I'm going to come back to that quote in a bit. And we've run usability tests around this sort of thing. This is a very typical response. This is an extremely typical response. Some first-time shoppers couldn't remember if it was their first time or not. They became frustrated as they entered the email and password combination, and they tried different combinations, common passwords. You've all got different validation rules for your password, so it's never the same password. They were surprised how much people resisted registering. They'll flail and flail at that login form, presuming maybe they're registered, maybe I'm just going to hit on the right combination, and they'll only hit the register button as an absolute last resort. And all the users that did click on the register button did so with a sense of despair. I think that's completely the right word. That's what I feel every time I have to register or log in on a site I'm not all that familiar with. Despair. But we did this to make it easier for repeat customers, right? But the repeat customers weren't any happier. When a shopper couldn't remember the email address and password, they'd attempt at guessing what it could be multiple times. Some would eventually ask for a password reminder, which is a problem if you can't remember which email address you used. And 45% of all customers had multiple registrations in the system. That's despite the fact they were forcing the users to register. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. 75% of those people never tried to complete the purchase. So once they fired that password reminder, they never actually came back and finished the purchase. Does that chime with anyone's experience? You're frustrated with the thing, you hit the password reminder, you go to your email to get the password, there's an email from your boss, it's more important, I'd better just respond to this email. You never go back and complete the transaction. So what they did was, the recommendation from the usability study was that they took away the register button and they put a continue button in its place, and they added this message, which basically says you don't need to create an account, but you can do during checkout if you want, and that might help you later. Okay? The result of that was that the number of customers purchasing went up by 45%. The extra purchases resulted in an extra $15 million for the first month. So for the first year, that was $300 million. Okay? Right. So that's the famous $300 million button. And this is from 2009. Okay? So it's passed into usability folklore. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, the arts is different. We're selling a unique experience, not a commodity. Our audience is loyal. They'll go the extra mile, and they expect us to recognize them. Denial. This is a conversation between a couple of friends on Twitter. It proves nothing. It's, you know, it's not statistical. It's just a conversation. Ever bought a ticket for something online and thought, well, that wasn't a terrible experience? If so, what site was it on? Peter Fletcher, minor internet celebrity. No, sorry, if there were one where I could buy a ticket without becoming some sort of member, then maybe, but never. Okay. Now that's quite interesting. I mean, this guy hounds me every time we launch a website. He says, "Will I have to register to buy a ticket?" And you know, I think there's a little interesting side note to that. He equates registering with becoming a member, right? But from the point of view of us and our IT systems, we don't think registering for an account on the IT system is becoming a member of anything. We think it's a step you have to go through to book a ticket. An interesting question to ask might be, if people do go through that pain to register with us, should they be some kind of member? Should we be giving them some kind of benefit? Is that the first tier on our membership scale? Decent question. I'm not here to enter into a relationship. I just want to buy something. So when I hear from
a guy don't walk on the lot lest he wants to buy. Sitting out there waiting to give you their money. Are you going to take it? Take it.
Okay, so I was just going to say before that auto jumped me, in that situation I always look to my spiritual advisor Alec Baldwin and the character he plays in Glengarry Glen Ross. And I think there's an important point here, because what very often happens is that we presume that the purchase is somewhere along towards the end of the customer journey. But when we're talking about customer relationships, the purchase is often the start of the customer relationship, not the end of it. Okay? So classical marketing theory is all about prospects and funneling them into getting them to be purchasers. But from our point of view, our first touch point with a customer is often when they first book that ticket. So if someone's on the lot, they want to buy, don't make it difficult, take their money, and then we'll start building a relationship after that. Always be building relationships. So here, if we're looking at a pyramid where actually buying a ticket is the first primary call to action. This is a small strategy slide for a client we're working with at the moment. They're a theatre group in LA. And what we have here is a very simplified, very commercial view of a customer relationship with that theatre. It got me in a lot of trouble with the artistic team. But what we're looking at here is the stages that people move through in their relationship with the organisation. Okay, it's a bit more nuanced and hopefully a bit more creative than this. But effectively, they're starting out as a curious LA resident. Maybe I'd like to go something. I've heard that there's good stuff on at that theatre. I've heard that show's good. Should I go and take a look at it? Okay, content priorities for them. What's on? Reviews, convincing people that this is something they might like to come and see. And the primary call to action is to buy a ticket. At this point, we're not trying to solicit a donation. We're not trying to make them a lifelong member or get them to leave something in their will. We just want them to come to a show so that they can start a relationship with us. Once someone's a single ticket buyer, we want to make them a regular ticket buyer. We want them to come regularly, not just once. And that's when we're pushing deeper content, stuff about your visit, diving deeper. So the next step in the customer relationship journey is, we know you're coming, here's some things to help you out with your first visit to us, and here's some more information. And what we're looking for the people to do at this point is to become social advocates for us. We want them to friend us, follow us, like us. We want them to be a regular attender who feels affiliated with our organisation. Once they're socially engaged, well, maybe it's time for them to subscribe or become a member, and that's the type of content that we're starting to feed those people. And once they're a subscriber, perhaps we're soliciting a serious donation, or what people can reasonably afford, because they believe in our mission. And it's at that point, all that content about the great work we do in the community, the benefits you will have as a subscriber, whether that's seeing a picture of yourself at a shindig with a famous actor, whatever it is. Those are the things that we're going to talk about. And then once you're a donor, well, we'd like you to leave us a legacy. And I'm not going to talk about what the call to action for a bequeather is because it's distasteful. So the thing about that, I think, is that when I talked through that login and registration process, that was and I showed you the $300 million button. That was the outcome of a usability study. We've done usability studies like that. We've seen exactly the same thing. But I honestly don't think you need to do a usability study to know the outcomes and to understand the problem, because you all are internet users and you face that same problem every time you have to register with a website you're a bit unfamiliar with. So, I'm sure when you heard those quotes from that usability study, it had the ring of truth because it was all stuff you've experienced, you know all about. So the question is, why do we push people through registration, and why do we do it prematurely? And these are the reasons that I'm usually given. Okay, or the reasons why I think people usually do it. Number one is overestimating the desire for engagement. Okay, so that quote, I'm not here for a relationship, I'm here to buy something. Okay, this is probably the number one problem in web design and application design, full stop. We overestimate how invested our users are in the interactions with us. Okay, how much time they've got to fill in our forms, how much they, if we come up with a convoluted process that they can fulfill online, how many people will actually go through that process, or how many people will just abandon it in frustration. We underestimate people's desire for engagement all the time. We overestimate it. And you'll find that yourself. You'll often be using a website where you're thinking, they're asking me these silly questions and they think I'm here to have a good time with their forms. I'm not interested. I've had enough already. And that's probably the number one step. People just don't think it's that much hassle. It is that much hassle. People are really busy. Number two is, this is what I would usually hear, we need to know who people are. And somehow the registration is the point at which we find out who people are. Okay? But the thing is, if we are selling them a ticket, for example, as the first step in engagement, we're asking them for an email address, postal address if you're going to send them the tickets, their credit card details, then you're starting to compile an order history, and if you're being smart, you've captured their click history. So you do know who they are. You don't need to push them through that registration form. All of these pieces of information are things you would collect during the normal course of doing business with that user anyway. That level of data makes classification systems like Mosaic look pretty crude, right? Okay, so here's a point that I think is important to look at, is that a lot of us, or a lot of people work in the arts, who sell people tickets and have online box office systems and things like that, you already know a lot more about your customers than Tesco does. So in many of these sorts of talk scenarios, people held up sort of Tesco loyalty card type plans as being a good idea because they learn so much about their customers. Well, organisations like Tesco's have to do that because their customer is a walk-up customer who is paying with cash, walking out very often. That's why they had to introduce loyalty card schemes to find out about their customers. We're not in that situation. We know about our customers because they're interacting with us through online systems, and we're capturing lots and lots of information about their purchase history and who they are. Number three is irrational fear of dupes, duplications, duplicate user records. So I actually happen to think that email addresses are pretty good for deduping, because each email address is a unique identifier that is globally verified by a top-level domain, right? You can't have two people with one email address, with the same email address. Therefore, the email address is a unique marker for an individual, and that's all you really need to deduplicate. I know what you're going to say next. On that $1 million button thing, we found, even though they were forcing registration and capturing it, they still had 45% duplicates with registration. Why is that? Well, it's because registration causes duplicates. Who's ever done this, right? They have one email address they really use. Maybe they have one for business, one for sort of home life, right? You tend to use the appropriate one for the appropriate situation. But then you hit a website, and it looks like you've already got an account with it, but you can't remember the password, and you can't be bothered, so you just register a new account using the different email address, right? That registration has caused that duplicate. It hasn't removed the duplicate. Now, I'm not saying that's the only cause of people using different email addresses and so on, but I think it's just worth considering. If you want to deduplicate by email, that's the sequel to do it. It's not really a big deal. Okay? So we spend a huge amount of time sometimes fighting duplicates that aren't really a massive problem, let's be honest. Whatever you do, you're going to get some duplicates, you're going to have to do a bit of manual stuff, but really, this is a reporting issue. It's not a data purity issue. 3A is a rational fear of SQL. Actually, most of the organizations that we work with who are pretty good at their data extractions and knowing who they're talking to and their targeting and all that sort of stuff have someone internally on the team who doesn't mind doing a little bit of SQL. So I think that's to be encouraged. What about people who don't have email? We did have one client, a very prestigious opera house, who had probably plenty of lords and baronets amongst their customer base who didn't have email addresses. But it turns out those people aren't buying online anyway. They're communicating exclusively via Stagecoach mail anyway, so that's not really a problem we need to think about. Oh yeah, and so increasingly, we're going to look at authenticating with Facebook. I got authenticated at a hotel using Facebook the other day because I'd lost my passport. So then we've got to think about, what about people who don't have Facebook? You know, there's all this younger generation who don't even use Facebook. Well, those people are spending all day sexting, and you can't compete with that. And I don't suggest you try to use that as a channel for authenticating people. Unless you're Sadler's Wells. It's anyone from Sadler's Wells. Okay. Pandering to edge cases. This is a good one. What if a couple shares an email address? Ooh. What if two people have the same postcode? What if someone's got two email addresses? The purity of the data is getting compromised. What if you're frustrating most of your patrons worrying about edge cases like that? Okay? If you've got a couple who share an email address, they probably do quite a lot of stuff together. They probably go to the theatre together and things like that. What you will find is that people will work around your systems all the time anyway. They'll find ways to work around it by using a shared email address or whatever it is. And if they do, they've done that for a reason, right? And actually, trying to make a small number of edge cases jump through hoops to make sure your data is pure is going to frustrate the majority of your patrons. So let's just try and focus on making the 80% have a nice, smooth experience. And if the other 20% want to try and find a way to circumvent it, let's not compromise the 80% for that reason. This is one: belief in one true database to rule them all. Right? I've dealt with a lot of people who won't do anything because it's not in the one true database that doesn't exist yet. That will rule them all. Okay? You're never going to get it. And I suspect you might be hearing something like that from the next speaker. Unless you drink the Testatura Kool-Aid. Okay, so most of our clients who work with Testatura, specifically the ones who've really drunk the Kool-Aid, actually do have the one true database. Lucky them. But there's always going to be edge cases. You're going to have a new email system that doesn't quite plug in. You're going to have some new barcodey thing that maybe isn't connected to your one true database. There are always going to be additional systems, and you're always going to have to use something like email address to try and figure out who people are. And it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't stop you from getting on with doing things. But that is quite a good excuse not to do any marketing. I've seen a few people wait for the one true database and not talk to their customers very much while they wait for it to come along. part of that is just a terrible fear. What if we email someone with an offer and they've already booked to go to that event? I don't know, apologise, say we're going to give you the offer anyway. These things shouldn't stop you from talking to your customers. So what are some genuine needs for authentication? I'm kind of made out that maybe you don't need to do much registration at all. Genuine needs. Retrieving personal information. So you shouldn't expect me to register to give you an order, but you should expect me to authenticate before you show me that order back. Because if I know your email address, I shouldn't be able to go and get your order history from some theatre's website. Okay? Especially if you're storing credit card details and things like that. So there's no way you should be saving my credit card for future use if I'm not a proper registered user. And obviously, once you hit a certain point in that user journey, when you become a subscriber or a member or a donor, then you've got benefits for those users that you need to make sure you're giving the right person the right benefit at the right time. And at that point, you need those people to be registered. Whether they have to be registered in the traditional way or not is another question. So there are some interesting lightweight alternatives to usernames and passwords, which we could consider. I ran out of time for, I was putting together some of these slides on the train and I ran out of time to get really good screenshots. So ticket number is a good way to authenticate the fact that someone's actually got, you know, they own that relationship with you because they're holding a ticket, right, that you have given to them. So you know it's like a two-factor authentication thing. Giving someone a ticket with a unique number on it means you can verify who they are. Okay. One type of ticket where they do that very well is parking tickets, right? I don't have to set up a username and password to pay my parking tickets. I don't like paying parking tickets, but actually the user experience of paying parking tickets is extremely good. It's a lot better than most arts venue websites. And that's because all they require is the registration number of the vehicle and the number that is printed on the ticket. The theory being, why would you pay someone else's parking ticket? Okay. But you do see those sort of lightweight things elsewhere. In the travel industry, you see it quite a lot. I know they're not selling a unique experience, except they could be, depends where you're flying, I suppose. But here, I've been sent an email from United telling me to check in. When I click that check in now button, it's not going to ask me for a username and password to tell them who I am. It doesn't need to. They sent me the email. It's just as good as if they'd sent me a password reminder. They sent me the email. So I can just click on that link and check in. Mobile phone numbers are pretty good, very personal, good unique identifier. And for certain use cases, maybe if it's you're sending someone a ticket, or someone's picking up a drinks voucher, or something like that, a mobile phone number can be a very good unique identifier. Credit card can be a very good unique identifier. If I gave you my credit card details to purchase a ticket, then you can use that credit card to verify that I'm the right person to pick up the ticket or to buy an upsell on top of it or whatever. You can use that as a good identifier. And last, bring it back to a sort of typical web context, social login with Facebook or Google. The difference between these is, obviously these both require usernames and passwords, but these are sites that people are using more or less every day, so they don't have the same issues about forgetting passwords and things like that because they're sites they're regularly using. That's one of the reasons I would think that Amazon outstrips all the other retailers by such a margin, is because people know their Amazon login and it leaves them logged in. Same token, Facebook will essentially leave you logged in most of the time. So if you hit this button to go forward, you probably won't even have to put a username and password in. So how can we improve things? So we launched a new ticketing flow for Lincoln Center yesterday, and we tried to take on board some of these learnings. I'm sure we didn't get it perfect, but I'll show you how we reimagined that ticketing flow a little bit. So I am going to buy a ticket. So at the point that it's time for me to check out, this is when you'd usually be asked to register or log in. We just ask for the email address, not the password. It's because we want to know if the person's registered before we tell them whether they should be registering or logging in or what. Next. Okay, I don't have an account, so it's not going to hassle me to set one up. Okay? So there I go, I'm checking out. They're going to need my address because they're going to need to send me tickets. Seems like a reasonable time to ask for an address when you're saying, how do you want your tickets to be delivered? I'm going to pay. Okay, now I'm going to put in my card details. It's going out on YouTube. Complete, purchase complete. Fairly painless, comparatively painless. And now it's asking me if I'd like a full account, okay? First date, kiss on the cheek, right? This is the right time to ask, not up front. And then now I'm a user, I'm registered, okay? So, come back in a few months. Talking of cheeks, I'm looking for cheek by jowl. Okay. Cart. Okay. Check out. Ooh, I think I'm registered. Just put my email address in. Oh yeah, welcome back, Jake Grimley. Do you know what though? I can't be bothered. I don't think I can remember my password. Skip it. Takes me 3 hours before. Come back another time. All right, I think it's my normal password. I'll put it in. Log in. Now I'm authenticated. It can show me my billing address and so on, right? Because it knows it's me. It captured it last time before I even set up an account, but it wouldn't show it back to me until I'd registered properly. Same with credit card details. Here's another time. Okay, what I probably would have done in real life is my first user journey. Check out. Log in with Facebook. There we are, logged in. The thing is, even though it's Facebook, it can still connect me to my order history because they both use the same email address. Okay. And now I have a proper account, so I can register credit card details and things like that for next time if I want to. But that's just the start. I don't have time, that's the start of the relationship. We're trying to get off on the right foot. We're trying to remember who people are. We're trying to dedupe, but we're not trying to force people through difficult user journeys. And I don't have time to talk about all the rest of the relationship. I'll just talk very briefly. I've got 2 slides about personalization. Strategies you can take to that. Okay, once people are into our system, once we're starting to push them down that customer relationship journey, there are various things we can use to personalize the experience that people have using the website. So click history, this is the first one. Before you actually know who someone is, before they even put an order through, you do still have their click history. You know what they've been clicking on your website. Okay, so what that means is you can get a sense of people's personal preferences just by recording the things that they were clicking on. So it's easier for some types of venues than others. If you're a colossal arts centre and people seem to be singling out the rock and pop events, you've got a reasonable idea, just in their click history, you've got a reasonable idea of that person's personal genre preferences. Once they actually start purchasing with you, you've got an order history. So that's like the click history, but just more powerful because this shows actual financial commitments they've made to certain genres and things like that. Once they have a registered profile with you, you know how to greet them by their first name. You might have a postcode for them, which you can run against some mosaic data or whatever. You've got more information that you can use. And if they've updated their email subscription preferences, then they're directly telling you what they're interested in hearing about. That's an interesting one, email subscription preferences, because I think if it's done wrong, it can be like the register form. You hit people with 100 checkboxes. What do you like? Kind of like, you don't know me. Don't ask me what I like. But you can figure out by building a relationship with people what they like. Memberships and subscriptions. Okay, so once someone starts donating regularly or joining a membership scheme or whatever, then you know a lot about them personally and how to communicate with them in terms of the level at which they're interacting with you as an organisation. Okay, so things like renewal dates and the right way to greet someone and making sure the right offer is in front of the right piece of content is in front of the right person at the right time becomes a lot easier and a lot more important. And what we use increasingly, this is a project it's the same project where I showed you the funnel that we're looking at, is we use a tag vocabulary to try and join up a lot of these concepts. So the way this works effectively is that we think about lots of tags that might be associated with people who have a relationship with you and content that you have, whether that's a show, a news item, a piece of social media, whatever it is. We look at the different classifications for those tags, and we try to ensure that every piece of content you have is being tagged using that vocabulary. So that's whether you're putting an event on sale or posting a blog post, whatever it is, we try to make sure you're using the appropriate tag vocabulary. And then whenever a user clicks on that piece of content, or maybe puts an order through that relates to a piece of content, we update that user's scorecard based on this keyword vocabulary. So we might say, you know, user X is a family +2, a challenging +1, and in terms of funnel, a curious +1. That'd be someone who tends to book for non-challenging family events and is not very far along the relationship funnel. Okay, so that's the sort of automated scoring you can build off an order history and a click history, and make sure you're targeting the right pieces of content at the right time. And that's the end of my presentation. So if anyone's got any questions, how are we doing on time?
We're doing very well.
Really? Okay. All right. So if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer. If anyone wants to find me or my company, that's how you can do it. Any questions?